The Vanishing Ninth Legion. It begins, as many mysteries do, in the quiet drizzle of northern England. Around the year 117 AD, the Roman Ninth Legion Hispana, 5,000 disciplined soldiers of the empire, marched north from York into the shadowed lands beyond Hadrian's frontier. They were never seen again. The Roman record, usually so precise, falls abruptly silent. No letters home, no victory dispatches, not even a whisper of defeat. It's as if the earth itself swallowed them whole. Archaeologists have traced the legion's trail through the misty valleys of Eboracum, modern-day York, and into the Scottish lowlands. There, the ruins thin out, and the inscriptions cease. One tile stamped with 9 Hispana lies near the river Tyne, its edges worn by time, as if mocking our ignorance. In the centuries since, scholars have debated whether the legion perished in a catastrophic ambush by northern tribes, or whether it was quietly redeployed elsewhere in the empire, perhaps to the east, only to be extinguished by Parthian spears. Yet, no Roman historian ever recorded such a transfer. And here lies the unease. Rome boasted of her victories and mourned her losses in ink. To leave an entire legion unaccounted for feels less like bureaucracy and more like burial. In the villages north of York, folklore persists. Locals still speak of the marching thunder, phantom soldiers said to appear in the fog near old Roman roads, ghostly ranks glimpsed at dawn, moving with eerie precision before fading into the heather. It may be imagination, or perhaps a cultural echo passed down through generations. Still, when archaeologists unearthed a mass of weapons in Scotland's Caledonian bogs, some dared to hope for answers. Instead, radiocarbon dates crushed those dreams, centuries too early. Scholars still debate whether the Ninth's disappearance was military misfortune, imperial cover-up, or something stranger. Was the legion sacrificed in silence to avoid political shame? Or did the mists of northern Britain hide not enemies of flesh, but of legend? Even in the 21st century, the mystery endures. No bones, no banners, no trace of 5,000 souls. Just a silence stretching across time, as though the Ninth still marches, unseen, through the fog of England's forgotten frontier. The lost crown jewels of King John. In the late summer of 1216, King John of England, a monarch feared more than loved, rode west through the marshlands of East Anglia. His reign had been one of rebellion, betrayal, and failure. The Magna Carta had been forced upon him, only for him to tear it apart again in anger. Yet, even the most despised king carries symbols of divine authority. For John, that was his crown, the glittering embodiment of his fragile sovereignty. And it was about to vanish forever. The journey took the royal procession across a dangerous stretch of tidal estuary known as the Wash, where land and sea intertwined in treacherous silence. Accounts tell us that John himself rode ahead, leaving the baggage wagons, laden with gold, jewels, and relics, to follow behind. The tide, as always, waited for no man. Somewhere amid the shifting mudflats, the wagons misjudged the crossing. Horses sank, chests tumbled, and England's crown jewels disappeared beneath the brown, hungry water. It was October. Within days, the king himself would be dead, struck down by dysentery at Newark Castle. The timing felt biblical, as if divine justice had settled its accounts. Chroniclers of the age described the disaster with almost guilty delight, seeing it as punishment for his cruelty toward barons and clergy alike. Mainstream historians point to the Wash's changing tides and vast mud banks as the likely culprit. Over centuries, dozens of treasure hunters have probed those shifting flats, hoping to recover what was lost: gold cups, jeweled crucifixes, and perhaps even the coronation crown itself. But nothing has ever been found. The landscape changes daily, what's lost there stays buried. And yet, some claim fragments of the treasure may have been recovered in secret. Local legends in Norfolk tell of farmers turning up curious golden trinkets or silver mounts near King's Lynn. Relics quickly disappeared again, sold or hidden to avoid royal scrutiny. In the 1600s, an antiquarian wrote of a chest of strange workmanship, dredged up from the silt, containing coins of no mortal stamping. None of this evidence has survived, of course. Scholars still debate whether the treasure truly lies in the wash, or whether it ever existed in such form at all. Some suggest the "Lost Jewels" story was crafted posthumously to dramatize a king's humiliation, an allegory for power swallowed by its own corruption. Others whisper that John's entourage may have deliberately staged the loss, smuggling the crown's wealth north during the chaos of civil war. Today, the wash remains eerily unchanged. At low tide, its gray plains stretch for miles, rippling like old parchment. And when the mist rolls in, one can almost imagine the creak of cart wheels and the desperate shouts of men sinking into history. The treasure may be gone, but its absence gleams brighter than any jewel ever could. The Princes in the Tower. London, 1483. The summer air hung thick with unease as the city's cobbled streets echoed with whispers of betrayal. Within the grey fortress of the Tower of London, part royal residence, part prison, two boys waited. They were the sons of the late King Edward IV, 12-year-old Edward V, England's uncrowned monarch, and his younger brother, Richard of Shrewsbury. They would never be seen alive again. The tale begins with ambition. Their uncle, Richard, Duke of Gloucester, was named protector of the realm until Edward came of age. But power has a way of corrupting purpose. Within weeks, rumors spread that Edward's legitimacy was in question, the boys were declared illegitimate, and Richard seized the throne as Richard III. The princes, confined for their safety, vanished from public view. By the autumn, they were gone entirely, swallowed by history's long shadow. Mainstream historians traced the story through a web of silence and suggestion. Chroniclers like Thomas More, writing decades later, painted Richard as a cold architect of murder, smothering the boys in their sleep. But More's account, rich in drama, was written under the victorious Tudor regime, Richard's enemies. Could it be truth twisted into propaganda? Or does the chill of authenticity still cling to its details? Centuries later, in 1674, workmen digging beneath a staircase in the tower discovered a wooden chest containing two small skeletons. The bones were hastily reburied in Westminster Abbey, presumed to be the princes. Yet modern science, with all its sophistication, has not been allowed to confirm it. DNA testing has been proposed but never permitted. As a result, the mystery endures, half legend, half evidence, all unease. There are other suspects. Henry Stafford, Duke of Buckingham, once Richard's ally, may have acted alone in a bid for influence. Or perhaps Henry Tudor, who later became Henry VII, ordered the deaths himself after seizing the crown, ensuring no rival claimants could threaten his fragile dynasty. Each theory has supporters, each motive plausible. And then there's the tower itself, its ancient stones bearing witness to secrets too dangerous to speak. Guards and visitors have reported ghostly children wandering the battlements, hand in hand, pale and silent. Some say the temperature drops when their figures appear, as if the air remembers their fear. It may be superstition, but the legend's persistence is its own kind of truth. Scholars still debate whether the princes were murdered, hidden, or spirited abroad under false names. Every generation rediscovers them anew, projecting its own conscience upon their absence. Perhaps that is the cruelest twist of all, that two children, stripped of life and voice, became the most eloquent symbols of innocence lost to power. The tower still stands, watching over the Thames as it always has. Its walls no longer echo with royal decrees but with the unending question, what really happened to the princes in the tower? The silence, like the stones, endures. The Green Children of Woolpit. In the 12th century, long before England's skies were patterned by railways or even windmills, there was a quiet Suffolk village called Woolpit, named for the wolf pits that lay on its edge. It was there, under the pale sun of harvest time, that villagers stumbled upon something wholly unearthly, two children, a boy and a girl, emerging from the pit's shadows. Their skin, they said, was the color of spring leaves. The story comes from chroniclers Ralph of Coggeshall and William of Newburgh, men of the cloth, not the tavern. They described the pair as speaking no known tongue, their clothes of strange material, their demeanor fearful yet innocent. The villagers brought them to a local knight, Sir Richard de Conn, who took them in. For days, the children refused all food, until someone offered raw beans, freshly pulled from their stalks. They devoured them ravenously. Slowly, the girl learned English, but the boy sickened and died, his green hue fading to pallor in death. As the girl grew, her strange color, too, began to fade. She was baptized and integrated into village life, even taking a new name and, according to some records, marrying years later. Yet her words left a haunting echo. She claimed that she and her brother came from a place of perpetual twilight, called St. Martin's Land, where the sun never rose fully and everything glowed green. She said they had wandered near a river of light, heard bells from another world, and followed the sound until they found themselves trapped in Woolpit. To a medieval mind, this was a miracle, or a warning. Some believed they were fairy children, others that they had stumbled from another realm of creation. More skeptical voices, then and now, suggest a simpler tale, perhaps Flemish orphans from a nearby village, displaced by conflict, their greenish skin caused by malnutrition, their language foreign to local ears. But this explanation leaves behind an unease. How did two lost children find their way from famine-stricken Flanders to an English wolf pit, speaking of a world of green twilight? And why did both chroniclers, writing independently, treat the story with such gravity? Scholars still debate whether the Green Children were allegory, misadventure, or myth interwoven with history. Some anthropologists propose that the tale records a real event, the encounter of isolated medieval villagers with outsiders so foreign they seemed not of this earth. Others, in more speculative moods, note that the story eerily mirrors modern myths of visitors from beyond. The village of Woolpit remains, its fields gold and quiet beneath the Suffolk sun. A sign by the roadside bears a tiny green figure, its eyes wide, its past uncertain. Each harvest, as the wind stirs the wheat, the story is told anew. Two children, a pit, and a question that no one has yet answered: where did they come from, and where did they truly belong? The disappearance of Harold II's body. October 14, 1066. A field near Hastings, drenched in blood and rain. The Saxon banners lie torn, their golden dragons trampled beneath Norman hooves. England's last crowned king of Anglo-Saxon blood, Harold Godwin's son, has fallen. The Bayeux tapestry depicts him struck in the eye by an arrow, a single image that has come to define his death. Yet, when the smoke cleared and the crows came to feed, no one could say for certain where Harold's body lay. The official chronicles claim William the Conqueror granted the fallen king an honorable burial by the sea, as a symbol of England's defeat and renewal. But others, those who fought and bled beside Harold, swore that William refused burial altogether, leaving the corpse unmarked on the battlefield, exposed to the elements as a warning. Still others whispered that Harold survived, wounded and unrecognizable, carried off to live out his days as a hermit in Chester or Canterbury. What we know is this: after the battle, the field was heaped with corpses, stripped and mutilated. Harold's mother, Jitha, is said to have offered William her son's weight in gold for the return of the body. The conqueror refused. Then, according to one Norman source, a woman named Edith Swan Neck, Harold's longtime consort, was allowed to search among the dead. By the curve of his scars, she claimed to recognize him. Yet even this account ends ambiguously: the body, once identified, disappears from record again. For centuries, Waltham Abbey has claimed to be Harold's final resting place. A modest stone slab beneath its ruins reads, "Here lies Harold, the last Saxon king of England." Excavations in the 1950s uncovered a grave beneath the spot, empty bones, male, middle-aged, but no proof of royalty. Radiocarbon dating failed to confirm identity. Even now, the abbey stands in quiet defiance, a place where faith fills the gaps that archaeology cannot. In fringe retellings, Harold's story stretches into myth. Some chroniclers of later centuries described a bearded hermit who lived in the fenlands, confessing in his final hours that he had once been king. Pilgrims sought him, believing that England's true ruler had never died but merely stepped out of history's gaze. The tale echoes those of Arthur and Frederick Barbarossa, kings sleeping beneath mountains, destined to rise again. Scholars still debate whether Harold was truly killed at Hastings or spirited away by loyalists to protect Saxon honor. The uncertainty gnaws at the edges of England's national story. After all, the Norman conquest reshaped the island's destiny, its law, its language, its nobility. Yet, if Harold's body was never found, then his defeat was never truly complete. On the hill of Senlac, where the battle once raged, wildflowers now grow among the mounds. The wind that sweeps across the fields carries whispers of triumph and loss, both equally eternal. Beneath that sky, somewhere between history and legend, the last Saxon king of England still waits to be found. The ghostly choir of Byland Abbey. North Yorkshire, late in the 14th century. The Cistercian monks of Byland Abbey, a community devoted to silence, discipline, and contemplation, began hearing sounds that had no earthly source. It started with faint whispers in the cloisters, voices that echoed after evening prayer when the world outside lay dark and still. Soon, the whispers grew into chanting, mournful, rhythmic, and unmistakably human. Yet when the brothers searched the aisles, they found nothing but candle smoke curling against the vaulted stone. The Abbey's chronicles, kept in meticulous Latin, record these disturbances without embellishment. Certain sounds, like the singing of souls, one monk wrote, did cause great fear among the novices. This was not superstition among peasants but testimony from scholars, men of faith, trained to reason. Still, the fear spread. Some monks refused to sleep alone, others confessed to seeing shadowed figures kneeling before the altar, their mouths moving in silent prayer. Byland Abbey itself was a marvel of its age, great Gothic arches, luminous windows, and an echo that seemed to carry eternity. Built around 1177, it had weathered centuries of reform and revolt. Yet by the time of these reports, England was scarred by plague and war. Whole generations had perished, burial grounds overflowed. It was a time when heaven and earth felt perilously close. One winter's night, according to an entry later copied by a scribe, a monk named Thomas awoke to hear the familiar choir, but this time, the chant was one he recognized, a funeral psalm long abandoned. Drawn by the sound, he entered the church. There, beneath the broken moonlight, he claimed to see a procession of pale figures walking the nave. Their robes were tattered, their faces indistinct, and yet they moved with devotion, each bowing before the high altar before vanishing into the shadows. When morning came, Thomas told his abbot what he had seen. The abbot, unwilling to dismiss him entirely, ordered the choir to sing that same psalm at sunset. The voices rose, pure and trembling, and for the first time in weeks, the ghostly sound ceased. It was as though the dead had been granted peace. Modern historians approach the tale with caution. Some suggest the monks were victims of acoustic illusions, echoes bouncing through the abbey's stone ribs, shaped by architecture and imagination. Others propose that exhaustion and grief, sharpened by years of plague, turned their faith inward until it produced the very visions they feared. But there remains an odd detail: the Byland manuscripts describing these events are the same that preserved some of the earliest English ghost stories. Their tone is neither sermon nor legend, it is reportage, calm and exact. Such things did happen, one chronicler notes simply, and none could say why. Scholars still debate whether the monks of Byland heard the echoes of their own prayers, or something far older carried on the northern wind. The abbey lies in ruin now, its arches open to the grey sky. Visitors speak of hearing faint music when the breeze passes through, notes that rise and fall like voices from another century, reminding us that belief, like stone, endures long after its builders are gone. The strange case of the dancing plague in Essex. It began, as most terrors do, with laughter. In the summer of 1374, villagers in Essex reported strange gatherings, men, women, even children, taken by an uncontrollable urge to dance. They twirled through the fields and streets until their feet bled, their eyes wild with exhaustion. They claimed not joy but torment. When the church bells tolled, they could not stop, when priests blessed them, they wept but continued. It spread like a fever. Though best remembered in continental Europe, in Aachen and Strasbourg, the dancing mania also swept across parts of medieval England. Records from Essex and Suffolk describe what one chronicler called a madness of motion, during which victims leapt and convulsed as if possessed. Monks at St. Albans Abbey wrote of villagers who leapt in frenzy and sang songs unholy, a phrase that has haunted historians for centuries. Mainstream explanations have changed with the ages. In medieval times, the clergy saw divine punishment, a plague of body and spirit sent by Saint Vitus, whose feast day coincided with the outbreak. Penitents formed processions, lashing themselves in the hope that repentance might still the madness. Later, physicians proposed ergot poisoning, mold growing on damp rye, capable of inducing spasms and hallucinations. Yet even this fails to explain the scale, the synchronized rhythm, the eerie music said to accompany the afflicted. One account from 1375 tells of a village near Colchester where a fiddler named Thomas of Dedham played ceaselessly for days, unable to stop. He collapsed mid-bow, his fingers locked in place, his body trembling as if still keeping time. They buried him in the churchyard, and for weeks afterward, villagers swore they heard faint strings at dusk, echoing through the hedgerows. Fringe theories abound. Some folklorists suggest that dancing plague was a covert protest, peasants expressing despair after the Black Death and heavy taxation, their trance-like movements a form of collective rebellion. Others drift further, perhaps pagan rituals, remnants of older fertility rites, resurfaced under the weight of Christian repression, their meanings long forgotten. Scholars still debate whether this dance was illness, ecstasy, or revolt disguised as madness. But whatever its cause, its terror lay in its unity, entire communities caught in rhythm, as though pulled by a single unseen hand. To modern ears, it feels almost poetic, an age suffocating under plague and faith suddenly breaking into motion, bodies speaking what words could not. Yet there is darkness in that poetry. For some, the dance never ended. Chroniclers record that many collapsed dead, their hearts failing mid-step. If one visits rural Essex today, there are places where the fields roll softly toward the horizon, and in the evening breeze, the grass seems to move in waves, slow, measured, almost rhythmic. The locals smile at such talk, but the old church records remain. A note in fading ink reads, "They danced until the earth took them." Perhaps that is all history ever is, a series of movements we cannot stop repeating, long after the music has gone. The Curse of the Templar Treasure. The year was 1307, and the night air in London was tense with rumor. Across England, the once untouchable Knights Templar, warrior monks who had fought in the Holy Land and built a network of commanderies from Essex to Lincolnshire, were being seized by royal order. King Edward II, acting under pressure from his French counterpart Philip IV, accused them of heresy, corruption, and secret rites. What followed was a purge both swift and bewildering. Yet when the king's men broke open the Templars' treasuries, the gold and relics they expected to find were gone. In Temple Bar, in the heart of London, clerks inventoried empty vaults and sealed coffers filled only with dust. Eyewitnesses spoke of wagons departing in the night, guarded by knights wearing no insignia. Others whispered of ships slipping down the Thames at dawn, bound for the coast. Whatever the truth, England's share of the Templar fortune, silver ingots, chalices, and possibly sacred relics from Jerusalem, vanished without record. Mainstream historians agree that much of the order's wealth existed not in gold but in paper, loans, deeds, and debts owed by kings. When the arrests came, many of those records were burned, erasing fortunes with a single torch. Still, the mystery persists. Certain lists of confiscated assets mention items too holy for enumeration. What relics were these? The Grail? The True Cross? Or something more symbolic, a ledger of power that could undermine the crown itself? As the trials dragged on, many Templars were tortured into confessions, then recanted before dying at the stake. Their last recorded words, scrawled by scribes in trembling Latin, warn that, "The king and his house shall be cursed unto the 7th generation." Within a year, both King Philip IV of France and Pope Clement V were dead. Edward II's fate was no kinder. The coincidence bred centuries of whispers. The Templar curse had begun. In England, stories multiplied. Fishermen near the wash claimed to see spectral riders galloping across the shallows on moonless nights, their armor faintly glowing beneath the tide. In Somerset, locals spoke of an underground vault beneath Templecombe Church, where strange murals, painted eyes watching from the dark, hinted at secrets best left undisturbed. The paintings still exist, though no treasure was ever found. Archaeologists have uncovered fragments, a Templar seal here, a hidden cellar there. Yet the treasure itself, if it ever existed, remains beyond reach. Some believe it was spirited north to Scotland, where the order found refuge under Robert the Bruce. Others imagine it buried beneath the ruins of Temple Church in London, guarded by curses and collapsing stone. Scholars still debate whether the treasure was real or metaphorical, perhaps a spiritual wealth, knowledge deemed too dangerous for the medieval world. Whatever the case, its legend grew into an English obsession, fueling tales from Chaucer to modern thrillers. Today, Temple Church stands quiet amid London's legal quarter. Sunlight spills through its round nave, the same geometry the Templars once called divine. Step inside, and the air hums faintly with age, as if the stones themselves remember the night the wagons rolled away. Whether gold, relics, or truth was hidden within them, we may never know. But England still bears the silence of that loss, a reminder that some mysteries are not stolen, they are chosen to be kept. The mystery of the Glastonbury Cross. The story begins in 1191, when monks at Glastonbury Abbey, England's oldest and most venerated monastery, claimed to have discovered something extraordinary. Deep within the abbey grounds, beneath the ruins of an old oak and the tangled roots of legend, they unearthed a lead cross inscribed with strange Latin words, "Here lies buried the renowned King Arthur in the Isle of Avalon." Beneath it, they said, lay two coffins, one for Arthur, one for his queen, Guinevere. For a nation reeling from civil unrest, the timing was impeccable. King Henry II had died only 2 years earlier, and his son Richard the Lionheart had departed for crusade. England needed symbols, proof that its mythical unity had not perished. The monks' discovery offered precisely that. Pilgrims flocked to Glastonbury, coins filled the abbey's coffers, and the island's already mystical aura deepened. But the object at the heart of it, the Glastonbury Cross, was unlike anything else from its time. Described as crude yet ancient, its letters formed in an odd mixture of medieval and archaic Latin, as though someone were trying, imperfectly, to imitate a long-lost age. Chroniclers recorded that the cross was found 10 feet deep, between two stone slabs. The bodies within were of great stature, one with traces of golden hair still clinging to the skull. The monks, solemn yet triumphant, proclaimed Arthur found at last. Mainstream historians, however, have long suspected a fabrication. The abbey had burned to the ground in 1184, and rebuilding it required immense funds. What better lure than the rediscovery of Britain's most beloved king? Still, the mystery lingers, for the monks did not merely find bones, they found an object that no one has since been able to explain. The cross, reportedly preserved for centuries, vanished during the dissolution of the monasteries under Henry VIII. No sketches survive, only written accounts, all slightly different. Fringe theorists propose that the cross was a genuine relic, perhaps older than the abbey itself, left by Celtic monks preserving a tradition of Arthur's burial at Avalon. Others suggest it was planted by Glastonbury's canny abbot, Henry de Sully, a man with both political ambition and imagination. A third theory, rare but intriguing, claims the cross's lead and inscription style resembled Byzantine craftsmanship, hinting that it may have been a far older object repurposed to fit a legend. Scholars still debate whether Glastonbury's discovery was pious fraud, nationalist myth-making, or an authentic glimpse into Britain's pre-Norman past. But one truth remains, the find transformed Glastonbury from an obscure abbey into a site of eternal myth. Walk its grounds today and the air feels heavier, layered with centuries of belief. The Tor rises above the mists, just as it did that spring morning when the monks struck lead with their spades. Was it coincidence, or choreography, that they found exactly what England needed? Perhaps Arthur never rested there, or perhaps he did, briefly, until belief itself moved him again. The Glastonbury cross may have vanished, but its inscription still seems to hum beneath the soil, whispering the same impossible promise, that the king will return, when Britain's need is greatest. The riddle of the Eleanor crosses. In December 1290, as winter crept across England, bells tolled from Lincoln to Westminster. Queen Eleanor of Castile, beloved wife of King Edward I, was dead. The king, hardened by conquest yet undone by grief, ordered something unprecedented, that a stone cross be raised at every place her funeral procession rested on its long journey south. 12 crosses in total, each carved with angels and weeping queens, rising like sentinels along the road from Lincoln to London. The Eleanor crosses, as they came to be known, were masterpieces of Gothic art and royal devotion. Yet in the centuries that followed, they fell victim to war, weather, and neglect. Only 3 still stand today, at Geddington, Hardingstone, and Waltham Cross. The rest crumbled into the soil, leaving little more than shards of limestone and legends of lights flickering above their ruins. But the true mystery is not their loss, it's their symbolism. Why did Edward, a king known for his brutal campaigns in Wales and Scotland, commission such a delicate, devotional act? And why did the iconography of the crosses grow darker the further south they went? Early chroniclers noted that the carvings became less joyful, more mournful, as if reflecting the deepening of Edward's grief, or something more deliberate. At Lincoln, angels smile, at Waltham, they seem to weep. The final, greatest cross was said to rise in Charing, near the King's Palace at Westminster. It vanished entirely during the Reformation. Some 17th-century antiquarians claimed it was deliberately dismantled under orders, its stones reused for other buildings. But a fringe theory persists that the Charing Cross wasn't destroyed at all, that it was dismantled and buried beneath what is now Trafalgar Square, to conceal alchemical symbols inscribed within its base. Mainstream historians tend to dismiss such speculation, but odd details persist. Documents in the British Library refer to a hollowed reliquary at the Charing site, possibly containing fragments of Eleanor's possessions, or her heart. Indeed, it was common for medieval royalty to divide their remains, one burial for the body, another for the heart, and a third for entrails. Could Edward have sealed part of Eleanor within each monument, turning the route into a sacred map of mourning? Fringe theorists have tried to chart the crosses' locations on old maps, noting that they seem to form a faint line pointing toward Canterbury, the seat of England's spiritual power. Coincidence, perhaps. Or perhaps Edward, ever the strategist, turned his grief into a declaration of divine kingship, embedding his sorrow into the very landscape of his realm. Scholars still debate whether the crosses were acts of pure devotion or instruments of propaganda. Were they love letters carved in stone, or reminders to every traveler that even death bent to royal will? The answer lies somewhere between faith and architecture, between what was felt and what was built. Stand before the remaining cross at Geddington, and you can almost hear the faint tolling of bells, the shuffling of horses, the distant sob of a king who could conquer kingdoms but not the grave. The carvings are weathered now, their faces fading, but in the right light, the stone seems to move, as if Eleanor's procession still passes by, unseen, along England's oldest road of love and loss. The enigma of the Dunstanburgh Lights. On the ragged coast of Northumberland stands Dunstanburgh Castle, its ruins clawing at the North Sea sky like broken fingers. Built in 1313 by Thomas, Earl of Lancaster, a rebel noble and cousin to King Edward II, it was meant to be both fortress and refuge. Instead, it became a monument to betrayal. Thomas was captured and executed for treason, and Dunstanburgh, once gleaming with ambition, fell into ruin and myth. Yet even after its fall, the castle would not rest. Fishermen along the coast have long reported eerie lights moving among its crumbling towers. Blue and gold flickers, rising from the sea and vanishing through stone, sometimes forming patterns like a silent procession. Medieval chronicles call them the lanterns of Dunstanburgh. The earliest account comes from a 14th-century monk who described a light that burned within walls long empty, seen by men of sober repute. He claimed it appeared on the anniversary of Lancaster's death, glowing as though the traitor's soul wandered the battlements, searching for pardon. Mainstream historians dismiss these tales as coastal phenomena, marsh gas, or the reflection of distant fires across the water. Others suggest St. Elmo's fire, an electrical glow that dances atop ships' masts in stormy weather, mistaken for ghosts by those who did not yet understand the sky's secrets. Yet the sightings continued long after such explanations were known. In 1737, a sailor wrote of lanterns upon the cliffs that vanished when approached, and in 1901, a lighthouse keeper recorded orbs like burning coins drifting through the sea mist. Still, the legend runs deeper than optical illusion. Folklore says that Lancaster, condemned and executed without fair trial, cursed the king with his dying breath. His body was hacked apart, his head displayed on a pike, but his spirit, so the story goes, returned to Dunstanburgh each year, accompanied by the ghostly lights of his slain followers. To this day, locals refer to them simply as the Earl's Watch. Archaeologists excavating the castle in the 1980s found something that reignited the mystery. Deep beneath the gatehouse, a hidden passage leading toward the sea, blocked by centuries of collapse. Inside were fragments of torches, a bronze crucifix, and a child's carved whistle. What were they doing there, so far below? A smuggler's hideout? A secret escape route? Or remnants of some long-forgotten ritual meant to keep the dead at bay? Fringe theorists have proposed stranger ideas, that the lights mark the boundary of a buried chapel dedicated to St. Cuthbert, or even a site of pre-Christian worship where flame was used to summon guidance from the sea. Some have gone so far as to connect the phenomenon to ley lines, those imagined currents of energy said to flow beneath Britain's sacred landscape. Scholars still debate whether Dunstanburgh's lights are natural, supernatural, or psychological, a blend of fear, faith, and the human need to find meaning in the dark. Yet those who have stood there after dusk say the air itself changes. The wind drops, the sea grows still, and for one heartbeat, a faint light flickers in the windows high above, just where no floor remains. Walk the ruins on a stormy night, and the stones hum with the sea's endless breath. Perhaps the lights are nothing more than tricks of weather, or perhaps they are Thomas of Lancaster's eternal defiance, burning quietly against the tide of history. Either way, Dunstanburgh's cliffs remain a place where reason falters and mystery takes root, glowing faintly against the northern sky. The skeletons of Warham Percy. Deep in the folds of the Yorkshire wolds lies Warham Percy, once a thriving medieval village of thatched cottages and tilled fields. Today it is only a scatter of stone outlines and a ruined church tower, a ghost village preserved by silence. Yet it is what was found beneath that silence that unsettled historians most. In the late 20th century, archaeologists excavating Warham Percy uncovered hundreds of skeletal remains buried in shallow pits near the old churchyard. Many of the bones bore the unmistakable marks of burning, dismemberment, and deliberate mutilation. Skulls were cracked open, limbs severed, rib cages scorched. At first, the team suspected medieval crime or warfare. But the evidence told another, more chilling story. The villagers had done this to their own dead. Mainstream archaeology offers a rational explanation. In the years following the Black Death of the mid-14th century, England was gripped by fear of pestilence, famine, and the uncanny. Ritual destruction of corpses, breaking and burning bones, was meant to prevent the dead from returning to spread disease or vengeance. Similar practices have been recorded across medieval Europe, the destruction of revenants or walking corpses. Yet Warham Percy's evidence was strikingly organized. The pattern of wounds, the uniform burning, and the care with which bones were reburied suggest a ritual, not panic. Contemporary chronicles shed little light. The parish registers end abruptly around 1500, and local memory dissolved soon after. But the oral traditions that lingered centuries later spoke of the restless dead and fires in the ground. Some even said the earth itself groaned when disturbed, as if remembering what had been done. Fringe theorists have proposed darker possibilities. Some claim Warham Percy was the site of secret heretical rites, perhaps linked to the outlawed Lollards, where desecration of the dead symbolized rejection of church authority. Others suggest something older, a survival of pagan customs aimed at protecting the living from malevolent spirits. A few go further still, suggesting the mutilations were not posthumous at all, but acts of execution masked as burial. Scholars still debate whether the villagers of Warham Percy were victims of superstition, desperation, or something unseen. But all agree that the care and repetition of the acts point to belief, not cruelty. To break the bones of one's kin required conviction, a sense that the danger from beyond the grave was real enough to justify such horror. Today, English Heritage maintains the site as an open-air museum. Tourists wander the meadow paths, reading plaques that speak of medieval life and rural collapse. Yet few know what lies beneath their feet. On quiet evenings, when the wind sighs through the grass and the last light catches the church tower, it's easy to imagine the villagers gathered around those shallow pits centuries ago, faces lit by firelight, eyes full of fear, performing a grim mercy in the name of survival. The bones of Warham Percy now rest in museums, carefully catalogued. But even under bright display lights, their scorched surfaces seem to whisper. Not of death, but of belief, of a time when the line between the living and the dead was thin enough to burn. The Phantom Monks of Rufford Abbey. In the dense heart of Nottinghamshire, where mists coil among the oaks and the air smells faintly of moss and thyme, stand the remains of Rufford Abbey, a Cistercian monastery founded in the 12th century and later consumed by the dissolution under Henry VIII. For centuries after its fall, travelers passing through the estate told of figures gliding through the cloisters at night, tall, hooded forms, silent as falling snow. The tales became so consistent that even the skeptical began to wonder, were the monks of Rufford still walking their nightly prayers long after death? The earliest mention of the phenomenon appears in an estate ledger from 1563, written by the first lay owner of the property, Sir George Talbot. In it, he complains that servants do take fright from phantoms in the old church and will not pass through the gallery by moonlight. Later, in the 17th century, visitors described strange chanting echoing from the ruined chapter house, low and wordless, as if sung through stone. Mainstream historians attribute these reports to the abbey's acoustics, a network of hollow passages and vaulted chambers that amplify even the faintest breeze. Yet one curious detail resists easy explanation: the chant itself. Local witnesses across generations described it not as Latin hymn or English dirge, but something between, a droning hum that swelled and receded like breath. The phenomenon occurred most often on winter nights, when fog rose thick and the ground seemed to exhale. Modern investigations in the 1960s recorded unexplained infrasound, low-frequency vibrations capable of inducing unease and auditory hallucinations. Could this be the voice of Rufford? Perhaps. But folklore insists otherwise. The villagers tell a different story, that when the abbey was dissolved in 1536, its last abbot defied the royal order, refusing to surrender sacred relics. The king's men dragged him to the crypt and sealed it behind him. Some say the abbot's final curse bound every monk who had ever prayed within those walls to rise at night and keep vigil, awaiting divine justice. Archaeologists excavating the crypt in 1912 discovered fragments of broken reliquaries and, chillingly, a human hand, severed, mummified, and clutching a piece of parchment too degraded to read. Whether relic or remnant, it deepened rather than dispelled the mystery. Fringe theorists point to reports from the 18th century of flickering lights drifting through the cloisters, blue flames that moved against the wind, vanishing at the old altar's base. One antiquarian claimed these lights marked a hidden vault wherein the monks sealed their treasure. Treasure hunters dug there in 1807 and found nothing but waterlogged soil. Scholars still debate whether Rufford's phantom monks are products of natural resonance, historical guilt, or a residual echo of faith itself. For even skeptics admit that the abbey's atmosphere defies indifference. Stand there at dusk, and the silence feels alive, as though the stone remembers the rhythm of prayers once spoken within it. The abbey today is part of a public park, families picnic where choirs once sang. Yet even amid laughter and sunlight, a curious stillness lingers in the cloisters. Visitors report a faint pressure in the chest, a sense of being watched, never hostile, but profoundly ancient. If ghosts are memories made visible, then Rufford's monks are not hauntings but habits that refuse to die. Their chants, real or imagined, are the heartbeat of devotion persisting through centuries of ruin. Perhaps the abbey's greatest secret is not that its monks remain, but that they never truly left. The mystery of the lead books of Midhurst. In 1822, laborers repairing an old wall near Midhurst, in West Sussex, made a peculiar discovery. Hidden within a cavity were several small leaden sheets, rolled tightly and sealed with what appeared to be wax. When opened, they revealed inscriptions, crude Latin, fragments of prayers, and strange symbols unfamiliar to any priest. At first, the objects were dismissed as charms or curses, remnants of local superstition. But their weight, age, and complexity suggested something older, something not meant to be found. The parish vicar, Reverend William Puttick, recorded the find in his journal. The plates bore the names of saints unknown to our calendars and invocations in a script neither purely Roman nor English. When shown to antiquarians in London, the plates were dated, roughly, and controversially, to the late 14th century. But how could such lead books have survived unnoticed for nearly 500 years, and who had sealed them into the wall? Mainstream historians interpret the Midhurst lead sheets as ex voto offerings, prayers cast in metal, buried to seek divine intervention or protection. Such practices existed across medieval Europe. Yet the content of these inscriptions seemed stranger. Among the Latin lines were names and sigils associated with angelic hierarchies, and even hints of Hebrew lettering, a blend more reminiscent of alchemical texts than of Christian devotion. One passage, crudely translated, read, "To seal the earth and bind the restless." The discovery was quietly forgotten after a few were sent to Oxford for study and never returned. Of the originals, none remain, the rest were melted down, their inscriptions lost to the foundry fires of the industrial age. But their legend persisted in local lore. Some villagers spoke of the curse of the lead pages, claiming that misfortune befell those who handled them, broken limbs, fevers, or madness. One mason reportedly fell to his death the same day he helped unseal the wall. Fringe theories have since flourished. Some claim the lead books were the work of secret hermetic sects, hidden communities of monks who fused Christianity with esoteric practice. Others imagine that the plates were binding spells, intended to trap unquiet spirits within the church walls, echoing older pagan customs where metal charms were buried to ward off the dead. Still others, with more daring imaginations, link them to the mysterious Book of Lead said to have circulated among English alchemists centuries later. Scholars still debate whether the Midhurst plates ever truly existed, or whether their story grew from misremembered fragments and 19th-century Gothic fancy. Yet small details lend weight to their authenticity. A 1908 inventory from Chichester Cathedral lists a leaden tablet with inscriptions of obscure character, provenance uncertain. The artifact vanished during the Second World War. If genuine, the plates reveal a glimpse into a medieval mind unafraid to blend faith and fear, a Christianity that whispered to the unknown as easily as it prayed to heaven. Their message, half prayer, half spell, reminds us that belief in the Middle Ages was not pure but porous, allowing superstition to flow through like water through stone. Stand in the churchyard of Midhurst today and you can feel that mingling still. The air is dense, the earth rich with forgotten ritual. Somewhere beneath the stones, the last flakes of melted lead may rest, mute, but heavy with meaning. And in the stillness, one can almost hear the echo of that inscription, "To bind the restless." Perhaps it was not a curse after all, but a promise. The lost manuscript of the Monk of Worcester. In the year 1349, as the Black Death ravaged England, a monk at Worcester Cathedral Priory began writing a chronicle unlike any other. His name has been lost, but fragments of his work, known to later scholars only as the Worcester manuscript, suggest he sought not to record kings or wars, but the collapse of faith itself. What he saw and wrote were so troubling that, within a generation, the manuscript vanished entirely. The story begins with a note in a later chronicle: a book was made at Worcester concerning the great pestilence, which no man would read twice. That cryptic remark has haunted historians for centuries. No copy survives, but references to it appear in at least 3 monastic inventories from the 14th and 15th centuries. Each describes a volume of curious ink, blacker than soot, bound in serpent skin. Whether poetic metaphor or literal observation, the description has drawn endless fascination. Mainstream scholars believe the manuscript may have contained eyewitness accounts of plague-era horrors, so graphic, perhaps, that later monks destroyed it out of fear or revulsion. It was a common practice. Disturbing or profane works were quietly burned in cloisters, their ashes scattered among the herbs. But there's a problem. In one record from 1371, an abbot writes that the manuscript was sealed in the floor of the scriptorium lest its ink spread further. Spread. As if the very act of reading it carried contagion, not of the body, but of the soul. When the cathedral underwent renovations in the 1800s, workers did find something unusual. Beneath the tiled floor of the old library lay the remnants of a small chest, its hinges rusted, its contents long since decayed. Among the debris was a sliver of parchment, blackened and brittle. Ultraviolet analysis decades later revealed faint Latin words. There were voices among the dead, and they answered. The fragment was quietly reburied in the archives, catalogued without fanfare. Fringe theorists have turned this into legend. They claim the Worcester manuscript contained not plague testimony but ritual incantations or forbidden knowledge, perhaps imported from continental mystics fleeing the Black Death. Others believe it described psychological contagion, a mass despair so deep it altered the behavior of survivors. A few go further, suggesting that its author may have recorded supernatural phenomena he believed connected to the pestilence, lights in the sky, spectral processions, or voices heard in the wind. Still, scholars continue to debate whether such a manuscript ever existed at all. Was it merely rumor born of medieval paranoia, or was there once a text too dark for faith to endure? If so, what did it mean to spread? Could words themselves, when infused with terror, become infectious? Worcester Cathedral still stands, serene beside the River Severn. Its library holds thousands of manuscripts, their pages whispering with the rustle of time. Archivists speak, half-jokingly, of a book that hides from the catalogue. In the stillest corners, when the light fades, they say some volumes seem darker than others, as if swallowing the glow of the lamps. Perhaps the lost monk was not writing blasphemy or despair, but truth too raw for his age. A chronicler staring into the abyss of plague and finding that the abyss, somehow, stared back. His book may have vanished, but its echo remains, a reminder that some knowledge is not destroyed, only buried, waiting for the courage, or the folly, to unearth it. The silent bells of St. Mary's, Shrewsbury. In the heart of Shropshire, where the River Severn curls around the town like an old, patient serpent, stands St. Mary's Church of Shrewsbury, a survivor from the early Norman age, its spire piercing the grey sky. Its bells once rang far across the countryside, summoning market folk and monks alike. Yet one winter in the late 1400s, they fell suddenly, eerily silent. No storm had cracked their metal, no decree forbade their use. The bells simply ceased to ring, and for reasons no one could explain, no one dared to make them ring again. The earliest chronicle of the event appears in a parish register dated 1496. The bells gave no sound when struck, though the clapper fell true. Great fear took the town, for none would mount the tower again. A strange claim, metal does not lose its voice overnight. Yet multiple entries confirm the phenomenon, describing attempts by blacksmiths and bell founders to restore their sound. One craftsman wrote that the bells shuddered like beasts in pain but gave no tone, as if cursed. For centuries afterward, the legend grew, the silent bells of Shrewsbury. Some said the silence was divine punishment after the townsfolk refused sanctuary to plague victims. Others whispered of a monk executed within the bell tower, his final curse muting the bronze forever. And there was another rumor, darker still, that the bells had been melted, recast, and rehung not by craftsmen, but by alchemists. Their metal, tainted with mercury and other unholy elements, was said to reject the holy vibration. Mainstream historians see symbolism rather than sorcery. They note that during the late Middle Ages, bell silence often marked excommunication, a community cut off from God's sound. Yet that does not explain why, when the Reformation came and Shrewsbury's other churches rang again, St. Mary's remained mute. Even records of the Civil War in the 1600s described soldiers quartered there who heard bells that gave no note, though the tower shook. Then, in 1721, the silence broke. A new bell founder, Robert Wells of Aldbourne, recast the set entirely. But when the molten metal was poured into the old molds, the furnace flared with a sudden blue light. 2 men were burned, one swore he heard a scream like a trumpet beneath water. When the bells were finally hung and tested, they rang, but the townsfolk described their tone as hollow, sorrowing, unfit for joy. Fringe theorists have since seized on the details, the blue fire, the inexplicable quiet, the way each attempt to recast the bells seemed to go awry. Some suggest infrasound resonance, a frequency that disrupts human hearing but can make the body vibrate. Others claim the phenomenon masks an ancient protective charm, sealing something within the tower that must never be disturbed. Scholars still debate whether the bell's long silence was coincidence, collective dread, or a kind of psychological haunting. Yet visitors to St. Mary's today report odd sensations when standing beneath the tower, a subtle trembling, as if the air itself hums. And sometimes, on misty mornings, locals say you can hear a faint tolling that no one has rung, a single, distant chime that seems to come from inside the stone itself. Perhaps it is only memory reverberating through metal and time. Or perhaps the bells, after centuries of muteness, are still trying to speak, ringing for something long forgotten, or for someone who has yet to listen. The vanishing village of Trelech. In the rolling hills of Monmouthshire, near the Welsh border, lies a meadow where grass conceals the ghost of a vanished world. Here, archaeologists have uncovered fragments of what was once Trelech, a bustling medieval town that rose to prominence in the 13th century and then, inexplicably, faded from existence. Today, only earthworks and scattered foundations remain. Yet the question persists, how does an entire town, thriving and wealthy, simply disappear? The story of Trelech begins with iron. The powerful de Clare family, Norman lords of the Marches, founded the town as an industrial hub. By the late 1200s, it boasted over 400 houses, forges blazing night and day, exporting weapons and tools across England. Its population rivaled London's smaller boroughs. A wooden palisade surrounded it, and nearby stood the famous 3 stones, ancient monoliths from which the town took its name. But within a century, Trelech had declined so completely that by the time of the Tudor era, it was little more than a whisper in local legend. Mainstream historians have proposed several explanations. Some cite repeated attacks from Welsh rebels, especially under Owain Glndwr, that burned the town to ruin. Others point to disease. Trelech's prosperity relied on close, smoky quarters and filthy forges, perfect breeding grounds for plague. Yet none of these account for the eerie completeness of its disappearance. Documents that mention Trelech abruptly stop after the mid-14th century. No records of rebuilding, no refugees listed, nothing. Archaeologists in recent decades have unearthed tantalizing clues. Layers of charred timber and collapsed walls suggest a catastrophic fire, but only in one section of the settlement. The rest seems to have been deliberately dismantled. Tools were buried neatly, coins left in thresholds, as if the townsfolk knew they would not return. In one cottage, a crucifix was found buried under the hearthstone, facing downward, a symbol, perhaps, of protection or penance. Fringe theories abound. Some claim the town's decline followed a curse placed by a Welsh saint whose shrine was desecrated by de Clare's soldiers. Others propose that the town was abandoned for spiritual reasons, that its workers, consumed by greed, believed they had awakened something within the earth itself. The 3 stones, after all, were prehistoric, and locals long believed they marked a place of power. Legends speak of iron men emerging from the mists at night, hammering though the forges were cold. In 2002, amateur archaeologist Stuart Wilson purchased a field believed to be the town's lost center. His excavations revealed well-preserved hearths, pottery, and roads, but oddly, many of the household items appeared intact, not discarded. Bowls were stacked, a loom lay midweave, as though its owner had stepped away and never returned. Wilson described it as a town paused in time. Scholars still debate whether Treleka's end was sudden or gradual, but the mystery deepens each year. No mass graves, no written testimony, no clear disaster. Only the faint outlines of streets beneath the sod and the strange feeling, reported by many visitors, that the air hums faintly, like a forge still cooling after flame. Walk among the stones today, and the past feels unnervingly near. The breeze moves through the grass in long, rhythmic breaths, and sometimes, at dusk, locals say you can hear the faint ring of hammers from nowhere. Perhaps Trelek never vanished at all. Perhaps it simply slipped beneath the skin of the world, waiting, like so many of England's mysteries, for someone to listen long enough to hear it breathing. The Whispering Nights of Rollright. On the border between Oxfordshire and Warwickshire, in a quiet fold of countryside where sheep graze between ancient hedgerows, stands one of England's most enigmatic prehistoric monuments, the Rollright Stones. Though the circle predates the Middle Ages by millennia, it was in the medieval period that the site acquired its strangest legend, one that still resists explanation. The locals called them the Whispering Knights, and they said the stones could speak. According to the tale, the stones are soldiers, once living knights who followed their king to conquer the land, only to be turned to stone by a witch's curse when they failed to complete a prophecy. The circle of stones nearby is said to be the king's men, frozen mid-March, while a cluster of leaning slabs a short distance away, 5 great stones that seemed to huddle together, became the Whispering Knights, plotting against their leader for eternity. By the 13th century, the Rollright site had become a crossroads of superstition. Pilgrims on their way to shrines would stop to leave offerings. Local monks warned that doing so invited demonic company. Chroniclers mentioned the stones as places where lights were seen dancing and voices spoke from the air. Yet there was more to it than rural fantasy. Visitors who dared spend the night there reported faint murmuring, words indistinct but rhythmic, as if the stones themselves were breathing in syllables. Mainstream historians explain this through acoustic illusions. The limestone circle sits in a natural amphitheater of hills that amplifies distant sounds, wind, cattle, the shuffle of trees, into a low, whispering hum. It's also possible that people experienced infrasound, the same phenomenon that inspired ghost stories in other ruins like Rufford Abbey. But medieval people, surrounded by faith and fear, heard meaning in the wind. The stones, to them, were alive. Records from the nearby priory in the 1400s tell of monks attempting to bless the site, erecting a wooden cross at its edge. The next morning, the cross was found uprooted, splintered clean through, though no storm had passed. The abbot declared the ground restless and forbade his brothers from returning. Even centuries later, antiquarians found strange offerings buried there, small lead discs, carved with runes and crosses intertwined, perhaps an uneasy truce between pagan and Christian rites. Fringe theorists suggest that the stone's alignment with celestial events, particularly the midsummer sunrise, was known and preserved by secretive medieval orders, perhaps the Templars or their local sympathizers. One obscure 15th-century manuscript, the Chronicon Rollrithensis, claims the stones were used in consultations of the stars by men of the hidden science. Whether astrology, alchemy, or something else, no further record survives. Scholars still debate whether the medieval fascination with Rollright was reverence, fear, or simple curiosity. What's clear is that this was not a forgotten relic to them, it was a living boundary between worlds. The Whispering Knights in particular were treated with wary respect. Local custom forbade counting them aloud, those who tried were said to lose track every time, hearing voices interrupt their tally. Modern visitors report the same uncanny failure, 5 stones that seem to become 6, or 4, or none, depending on the light. At dusk, the fields fall silent, and the stones lean together like conspirators frozen in mid-sentence. The air moves through their cracks in long sighs, a sound halfway between breath and prayer. Perhaps that is the source of the legend, or perhaps it is the legend that shaped the sound. Either way, the Whispering Knights remain as they have for centuries, patient, listening, and, on certain nights, whispering back. The Hollow Hill of Alderley Edge. In the high sandstone ridge of Alderley Edge, Cheshire, the earth opens into gashes of red and gold. For centuries, miners have carved tunnels there in search of copper, silver, and something more elusive. But long before industry arrived, legend claimed that within that ridge sleeps an army, warriors of ancient Britain, sealed in a cavern with their horses, waiting for the day when England shall face its darkest hour. The entrance, they say, appears only to those who come at the right time, bearing the right need. The story gained its first written form in the 13th century, when chroniclers referred to the red hill that guards the sleepers. A shepherd, so the tale goes, drove his flock across the edge one morning and was stopped by a mysterious old man in robes of ash gray. The stranger warned him to turn back, claiming his sheep would not leave that place alive. When the shepherd scoffed, the man led him to a cleft in the rock that had not been there moments before. Inside, the shepherd saw rows upon rows of soldiers in shining armor, motionless but breathing faintly, each with a horse at his side. On an altar nearby lay piles of gold, and a single trumpet. "They sleep until England's need is dire," the old man said, "and no man may take their treasure." The shepherd fled. When he returned with others, the entrance was gone. Mainstream historians regard the legend as a medieval survival of older Celtic myths, particularly those of Arthurian, sleeping hero, traditions, in which a king or army rests beneath the land until called again. In a country constantly invaded and reshaped, such stories offered both comfort and continuity. But Alderley's tale is unusual in its persistence. Unlike Arthur's many burial sites, this one has physical geography that seems to fit. The hill is riddled with caves, natural and man-made, whose twisting passages still bewilder explorers. Throughout the Middle Ages, the area was avoided by locals after dark. Pilgrims passing through spoke of strange blue lights glowing from the cracks in the sandstone, and faint metallic sounds, clinks and hoofbeats, echoing from underground. Miners in the 16th century recorded tools disappearing overnight, only to reappear, smeared with blood-red dust. Some refused to work the deeper shafts altogether, claiming the air grew too heavy to breathe. Fringe theorists, of course, have woven the legend into a web of speculation. Some propose that sleeping warriors are relics of a lost Roman garrison, their resting place sealed by collapse. Others speak of druidic sanctuaries, or even time slips, imagining that those who vanish in the caves are trapped in some echo of another age. One 19th-century explorer swore he found carvings deep in the rock depicting knights on horseback, an assertion archaeologists could neither confirm nor refute, as the passage he described later flooded. Scholars still debate whether the hollow hill of Alderley Edge represents myth anchored in geology or geology swallowed by myth. Either way, the story refuses to fade. Even today, hikers find coins, ribbons, and handwritten notes left at cave mouths, offerings to whatever sleeps within. Stand upon the edge at dusk, and the land rolls away beneath you, a sea of fields and forest. The wind whistles through the hollows, carrying a low, resonant hum that sounds, to some, like distant horns. And perhaps, just perhaps, that hum is not the wind at all. For England's history is filled with such promises, that its saviors are never gone, only waiting. The hollow hill may yet stir again, if the kingdom ever cries out loudly enough. The Black Book of Bury Street Edmonds. There is a legend whispered among historians of East Anglia, of a lost volume once housed in the great abbey of Bury Street Edmonds, the spiritual heart of medieval Suffolk. Founded in the 10th century and famed for its magnificence, the abbey was said to contain not only relics of saints but also manuscripts of immeasurable power. Among them, one stands apart in the chronicles, Liber Nigelis, the Black Book, a codex that no one dared to read by candlelight. The first reference appears in a 14th-century abbey inventory, describing a black volume, bound in hide and sealed with iron clasps, containing matters not for the choir. The wording was odd, Bury's catalogues were typically precise. This entry read more like a warning. The next record, 50 years later, simply notes, "The Black Book shall not be opened except by the abbot in Lent." After that, silence. When the abbey fell to Henry VIII's dissolution in 1539, Liber Nigelis was gone. What might it have contained? Mainstream historians suspect a compendium of local miracles, perhaps tales deemed heretical or politically dangerous, hidden to protect the abbey's reputation. Others believe it was a collection of forbidden theological debates, texts challenging papal authority or mingling Christian doctrine with astrology. Still, certain hints in contemporary letters suggest something stranger. One monk, writing to a correspondent in Ely, described the book's ink as black as pitch, which devours the quill, and claimed the pages move faintly when touched, like leaves in wind. In the 17th century, an antiquarian named John Selby reported seeing a folio wrapped in chains, black of cover and fastened with an iron lock, in the library of a Norfolk manor. Its owner, a descendant of one of the abbey's former stewards, refused to open it, claiming, the last man to do so went blind before the week's end. The book disappeared again after his death. Fringe theorists, unsurprisingly, have built entire mythologies around it. Some call it England's own Necronomicon, a manuscript of apocryphal incantations and astrological charts allegedly derived from Arabic sources brought home by crusaders. Others suggest it was a manual of exorcisms, compiled after reports of demonic possession among the abbey's novices. A few propose that Liber Nigelis was neither theology nor sorcery, but science ahead of its time, a codex of alchemical experiments recorded in symbolic cipher, later condemned as witchcraft. Scholars still debate whether the Black Book ever existed at all, or whether it was an allegory for forbidden knowledge in an age of rigid faith. Yet scattered evidence persists. A marginal note in Cambridge University Library's Codex L42 describes an abbot who sealed a dangerous wisdom, while fragments of darkened parchment found near the ruins of Bury show traces of an unusual metallic pigment, perhaps the very devouring ink. Today, the abbey lies in ruins, its stones weathered and patient beneath the Suffolk sky. Tourists wander its cloisters, unaware that beneath their feet once lay a library whispered to contain England's most perilous secret. Some locals insist that, on certain nights, the wind passing through the arches sounds like pages turning. And if you stand there long enough, the murmur of Latin seems to rise, not from the air, but from the earth itself. Scholars and skeptics alike agree on one thing: the Black Book, real or imagined, embodies the medieval fear that knowledge itself could be a kind of sin. In that, perhaps, lies its truest legacy. For every age has its forbidden texts, and every library its locked door. Whether the Liber Nigelis still waits somewhere in the dark, or has turned to ash long ago, it leaves us with the same quiet warning: some mysteries are not meant to be solved, they are meant to remind us how little we truly know. Conclusion. 20 mysteries, vanished legions, lost treasures, silent bells, and books that may never have been. Each one a fragment of England's shadowed memory, where history blurs into myth and belief lingers like fog over a forgotten field. What binds them is not certainty, but curiosity, the medieval conviction that every ruin hums with meaning, every silence hides a voice. Modern scholarship can date bones, measure soil, and decode ink, yet the essence of these stories endures because they speak to something older than reason, our need to find pattern in chaos, light in darkness. In them, we glimpse a nation forever haunted by its past, forever reaching backward for truths that recede like mist. The mysteries of medieval England do not merely baffle historians, they remind us that even in an age of logic, wonder remains our oldest inheritance.